Right off the top, I wanted to say we have so much. I heard Rush Limbaugh say this, and I don't want to parrot him because, of course, the people who don't like conservative talk radio always say that we're all just parroting him, that we just sit there and listen every day and then regurgitate it back the following day. I don't know then why I've wasted all this time doing all of the research on a day-to-day basis for the last dozen years, but that's what you hear. But he did say something yesterday that I found to be quite apropos at the beginning of his program. He said there is so much going on that I don't really know what stands out as the lead. That is, in my case, today, the top story. We have a lot to talk about. Some of the things that will be going on coming up about 8:30 this morning. I believe Ken Menzel will drop by from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. And then after the following break, that's usually at 8:40 every morning. Well, not usually. It always is. As I told a caller the other day, these things are hardwired into my schedule. I don't really have much of a choice. What did he say? Something to the effect of, well, you always go to a commercial break after you talk about this. Well, yeah, I try to time what I'm talking about to the commercial breaks. It's funny because otherwise I'd have dead air. And ever since I got into the broadcasting business 30 years ago, I was told, avoid that. So I've worked diligently to try and follow the advice that I got from my bosses and the like. It's not as if I just started yesterday, although some days when I get out of bed, it certainly feels that way. 50 right now, coming up on 9 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you today on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Following the break at 8:40, Maxine Bell, state representative, scheduled to join us in studio. She's going to be talking about the upcoming special session that's taking place in Boise on the 18th, which is next Monday for those of you with public school educations. Also, today on the newswires. Now, I find this fascinating. So perhaps this thing is going to be a little longer than originally expected. There is going to be an opportunity for public input by legislators during this special session on this very topic. The topic being, if you're not aware of it, I think it's called SB 1067, and it's a Senate bill. It originated in the Senate, and that would enter Idaho into a federal program, the federal government working in conjunction with foreign governments to collect child support. That is, if somebody living in, I don't know, we'll pick a spot, Mountain Home or Meridian or Kimberly, just pick one, anywhere around Idaho. If they suddenly decided that they were going to leave town, skip town, in fact, and go far, far away beyond the borders of the United States. Let's say they decided to go to India, or they decided to go to Bhutan, or they decided to go to Mozambique. This would allow, now I don't know that any of those countries are actually involved in this treaty. I'm just throwing out some foreign countries, and hopefully you've got a globe there so you can look those all up. The idea is that if you go to a foreign country that is party to this treaty, that foreign country will help collect that child support. Now, if you believe what you read in the local newspaper, yes, if you believe what you read in the local newspaper, there are tens of thousands of Idaho children who are being deprived of child support because one parent apparently has fled the country. Think about that for a moment. The population of the state is what? A little over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million? Come on, where do they get that figure? Seriously, where do they get that figure? But that's the usual liberal argument. I used to be a relative neighbor to a fellow by the name of Dr. Lee Transo. Lee Transo may not be a household name, but during the Nixon and Reagan administrations, he was in charge of an office at the White House that was designed to cut the fat out of spending. And he used to tell me a story. He said, when I would be talking to the people who desperately wanted the money, whatever special interest group it was, they would always tell me, if you don't keep us on the list, 1 million children are going to starve to death. And then he said I would show them some statistics that would refute their claim. Then they'd say, well, I'll tell you what, 100,000 children are going to starve. So he would refute that claim, and then they would say 10,000 children are going to starve. So they always would just flip to another page of excuses. But he would whittle their number down while he happened to be at it. And I think that's a wonderfully telling thing when we hear that this number is perhaps, I think the number that was quoted by the Magic Valley Rag, Times News, was 17,000 children just in the Magic Valley. Give me a break. How many daddies have been going overseas to avoid paying child support in the state of Idaho? You might have half a dozen. Half a dozen, maybe statewide. All right, maybe we'll go with 20 or 30. This may be a solution in search of a problem. Now, I'm not going to begrudge legislators if they feel that they can pass this legislation and ensure protections for state sovereignty, and that we will not down the road, because the other part of this is the newspaper editorialists are all making fun of some of those state legislators who are concerned about creeping Sharia law coming into Idaho. Well, let's be honest about that. It may not be here today, it may not be here tomorrow, and it may not be here 5 years from now. But since we are in the new business of importing perhaps thousands of people from a part of the world where they have Sharia law, then, well, we could see it, a pressure for it here in the state of Idaho. And I'm just telling you right now, I understand what the concerns of some of these people are. They've seen what's happened in Europe, and they see their own government going down that very same road. Well, okay. The argument from the left apparently is, yeah, but that may not happen for 50 years. Well, why do we need to have it happen whatsoever? If you notice, you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have a cancerous lesion here, and you say, well, it's only a quarter of an inch in diameter. I'll ignore it for a couple of years and come back. How's that? Nobody does that because the thing could get out of hand. So when I hear all of the criticism of legislators who are opposed, now, I don't think that Maxine Bell is going to be what you'd call extremist about this in any sense. I think that she's keeping an open mind about it, but I think that we'll listen to what she has to say, and she's probably going to have a very good argument. The reason I wanted her to come in today, I happened to be at a breakfast sponsored by the Magic Valley Republican Women a few weeks ago, and some of our legislators spoke there, and I was impressed by all of them. But I'll tell you what, she is one of those people that you realize when she's in the middle of a debate or an argument in Boise, she's going to be heard. And I thought I'd like to have her on the show for that reason, because I like people who have those strong personalities. They are very good at articulating their position, even if it always isn't mine. So this is an opportunity for that to take place. But she also, I think, realizes the concerns of many constituents too as well. So this whole notion of a public hearing on this coming up on Monday, and who knows? I mean, one-day special session, it's not likely it's going to stretch into 2 or 3 days. They'll have a cow about that at the newspaper as well, because that could cost nearly $100,000. Here we are in a state that is spending $92 million over the next year, collecting and planning on spending it for road maintenance, and we're told that's not even almost a third of what they need. But the fact of the matter is, $100,000, sure, it's serious money. But sometimes there are serious concerns that accompany serious money. So that's coming up a little later in the program, and I wanted to spend some time offering some thoughts on that. But you really do live in a wonderful place, because I'm going to tell you right now, my own experience. I've lived in 3 other states. Now, when I was a kid growing up in New York, it was still primarily a Republican state, but then the dominance of one major city just sort of took over everything else, and it has been a socialist republic really now for 30 years. And then I lived in Vermont for a time, working at a television station, and that was a socialist republic. Then I moved to Delaware, which became a socialist republic pretty much within the next couple of years after I arrived there, and has been pretty much the same thing ever since. And you would not get a chance to have a public hearing on a matter like this in any of those states. They would simply tell you no. And they would go ahead and they would tell you, we know best. We are your public servants. Thanks for electing us to represent you. Now shut up. That's what they would tell you. And in Idaho, at least, they're going to open the door and say, come on in and share why you're concerned about this. And that's the huge difference between living on this side of the Mississippi River and, on the other hand, living on the other side of it. Now, you've got some states here in the west of the Mississippi that are purple, and some of them even blue. Minnesota comes to mind, although that, again, is a state dominated by one large metropolitan area consisting of mainly liberals. And then outside of that, across the Great Plains, it's mainly a Republican state. So you have these divides going on, but this is going to be, I think, a wonderful opportunity, and we're going to find out how you could go about offering testimony in that public hearing portion of this debate as well. Now, wouldn't it be nice, since we're going to have a public debate on this at the state level, wouldn't it be nice if there were people at the federal level who would come forward and say, tell you what, we're going to allow the same public input on our plans to bring hundreds, if not thousands of people here from the Muslim world and resettle them in the Magic Valley. But once again, we are now 2 weeks, I think it is a full 2 weeks, since it may be the 15th day, since that story first saw the light of day here in the area, and no one else is talking about it. No one is actually giving me any response about the possibility of some sort of public hearing, other than the fact we had a guest in yesterday from City Hall, and she said, tell you what, if you've got a concern about it, we'll allow people to speak at the city council meeting. On the other hand, there's not much they can do about it except also pick up the telephone and call people at the national level and say, hey, we've got a lot of people concerned about this. What are we going to do? Because we'd like to have some sort of public input on this. That's the whole idea of having representatives, is that they are willing to listen to us because they're supposed to do that, because they make these decisions. So I want to bring that up too in concert with this morning, and I would hope that somehow, somewhere, I cannot believe, because when I took this job, I was talking to a woman who works in the marketing industry in the Twin Falls area, and she told me that KLIX has been and remains perhaps the most influential voice in this community when it comes to media. You know, the newspaper's dying off, but apparently KLIX still remains and television news is all out chasing puppies. So you're not going to hear much about it there. It's all about, nice pictures and crying babies and that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is, if she's telling me that, and then I can extrapolate that there are people out there who are listening who work for these federal elected representatives and senators, then I can say safely that they know about this. And if what Benito tells me, it's the most talked about subject in the barbershop where he gets his hair cut every couple of weeks, then I think that this is already well known to the people in power in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. And frankly, I would think that they would show a little bit of foresight here, at least trying to work with the people who put them in office and come up with some sort of framework where we will get that public hearing, just to assure us, as I said yesterday, that there are no bad apples coming in with this big bushel, because simply we don't want that in this situation. We don't want people coming here who are going to raise the danger level, if you can put it that way. Coming up on 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I believe we have some folks joining us from Keller Williams this morning talking about a charitable event that they've got going on. That's coming up in a few minutes. Also, Ken Menzel will join us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in about 10 minutes. And then again, Representative Maxine Bell scheduled to join us in the last quarter of the program, or the last quarter of the hour today. And then another full hour of the show still ahead. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 51 at our studios, 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. We have a couple of guests joining us in studio for a few minutes, and they're here to talk about a very important event today. And they're joining us from Keller Williams. And this is interesting. They were telling me during the break that internationally, all the Keller Williams offices in the world today have shut down, not shut down per se, but they're not working on what you'd call their normal business because they're giving back to their communities. It's 8:24, 50 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I'm joined from the local Keller Williams office, which is not too far of a drive from here. Is it Fall Street?
Mm-hmm. It's on Filer.
Filer. I knew I kind of get them confused a little bit, but you're near a couple of really nice restaurants over there. I know that much.
Yes, absolutely.
We have Heather and Alicia joining us from the office. First of all, thank you for coming by today.
Thank you, guys.
I know that you've been running from station to station this morning, so
yes.
We're trying to keep everything compact, though. 4 doors and 1 hallway, and you just sort of have to have a guide to where am I going next. Well, tell me a little bit. This is called Red Day, right? You've got a T-shirt on that says Red Day. What exactly does this stand for?
So Red Day stands for Renew, Energize, and Donate. So it was created by Keller Williams International in 2009 as a way for our real estate agents to give back to their local communities. So on the second Thursday of every May, every Keller Williams real estate office closes for the day, and they go out and do some kind of community service.
And specifically, what do you do on the local level, or does it change from year to year?
It does change from year to year. And so this year we were actually building a picnic area for the tenants over at Martin Street Apartments for Valley House. So they have a common area to meet and kind of commingle, doing some flower planting, painting some porches, awnings, just kind of sprucing it up.
And Excalibur Construction built us this monstrosity of a picnic bench that's about 10 feet long, 5 feet wide. and takes up half of the park, but it's all good.
Yeah, no complaints. So,
For some reason, they didn't trust a bunch of realtors to build it themselves. So we're going to be painting it.
you're very good at selling it after it's built.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just going to be so comfortable. It's going to be the best picnic table in town.
Now, it's an all-day job. I mean, obviously, you get started not long after you walk out of here. You're going to be working probably close to sundown, right?
We have a lot of support. We have 30 to 40 agents that are going to be showing up. They've actually started at 7:30 this morning, loading everything up, getting it over to the apartments. So we started around 9, and then we'll probably be done by around 3.
Mm-hmm. It
We work
reminds
very
me,
well together.
Reminds me a little bit when you get a big crowd like that. When I was a kid, a third of my hometown is Amish, and when they would do a barn raising, it would take one day because there's just so many people working on it that, boom, they'd start and the barn would be finished by sunset, and everybody would be ready to go the next day. So it's the sheer numbers you're bringing in on this that helps with this project.
Absolutely. And Keller Williams Sun Valley, Southern Idaho opened in March of 2013. And so this is our 3rd year of observing Red Day, and we just realized each year how much better we work together. I mean, we work so well together. Last year we thought we'd be working till 5 or 6. We were done by like 1. So we just had so much support and help, and everybody really pitched in.
Good long lunch.
Yes, and we have the whole community helps out. All of our food, all of the supplies, everything's been donated to us. So Sherwin-Williams donated all of the paint. Lowe's helped us out a lot. We have a bunch of food vendors, Barry's Rentals.
Yeah, we got Twin Bean giving us coffee. Twin Bean gave us lots of coffee.
We haven't drank any yet. We wanted to sound a little normal.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I usually get fueled up on about half a pot before I start the show. So yeah, that's how we bounce off the walls in here. For people who hear about this program, when you select somebody every year, is it through an application process or nominations?
Well, this is our 3rd year, and every year we've just kind of gone out in the community and found something that we can do. We would love to have people start coming to us so that not only could we help on this one day a year, but we could help all year round doing different projects. We would love to be part more of the community and do a lot more.
For instance, like tomorrow we're going to be doing the Relay for Life as well. So we're going to be walking and doing that because Keller Williams is definitely a community-based organization. We're not the big corporation that comes in and takes over. We look to our community to support us. And if it wasn't for the community supporting us, we wouldn't have a business. So we feel it is so important for us to give back.
You must have, though, when you talk about this, all the international offices being involved, you must have 50,000 people working on these projects today, at least, right? I would say.
Oh, yeah. We're the largest real estate company in the world.
So you could have a couple of 100,000 people working on these projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it like she said, it's international. Every Keller Williams internationally shuts down so that we can get back to the communities that support us.
I'd say that it's a good example for other people in the industry, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Keller Williams is really big on their culture, our ethics, the way we treat people, our values, and we have a big belief system. So it's a wonderful company to work for.
I wanted to say thank you for both coming by. We got about 20 seconds left. If there's anything that I forgot to ask you about that you want to mention.
Yeah, you can come down and see us at 647 Filer Avenue if you have some need in the community, or call our front desk at 734-1991. And of course...
And if you want a hernia, come help us unload this picnic table.
I'll be watching. And if you have any real estate needs, come down and see us. We're a very friendly office, and anybody that's there can help you.
I want to thank you both for coming by, Heather and Alicia. And that line made my day. So, at my age, I don't need that. But I could come down and offer some rah-rah cheerleading encouragement.
Yeah, and anybody can come down and stop by and see what we're doing.
All right. So I want to thank you both for coming by today. Good luck out there.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully the rain will hold off.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. They're dropping by from Keller Williams today. Coming up next, Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. Hope you can stick around. My microphone nearly didn't come on here. I kept pushing the button, and then I realized I had a clipboard against it, and that was why it wouldn't move. Otherwise, Ken Menzel would be talking to me and me only, and I don't want to upset the law. So
Right.
He's here from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. It's coming up on 8:34:51 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. A couple of things you wanted to mention. Number one, this time of year especially, that we get into that period. The leaves come out. People need repairs done. They see repairs that need to be done. All sorts of people come out of the woodwork who are offering but not necessarily closing the deal, right?
Right.
You've got a scam of some sort going on.
We have a huge scam going on right now in Twin Falls County. Something that just we caught wind of this week, and we've been handling numerous calls on this scam every day. I think there were 3 or 4 of them yesterday. It's a man who, using a fake identity, presents himself under a couple of different names, either an Officer Dwight Garrison or Deputy Johnson, and he's calling under false pretenses on behalf of the judicial system. Among the other things that he is advising people of when he makes this phone call is that there's a warrant out for the arrest of the person with whom he's speaking with, and that there's a fine that goes along with it. In speaking with our jury commissioner, Jerry Woolley, one of the things that she mentions is that somebody from Twin Falls County presenting themselves as an officer or a deputy presents themselves as saying that they failed to appear for jury service, and that due to the fact that they signed a certified letter that there's a warrant out for their arrest. We don't have anything going on like that here in Twin Falls County. There is no juror at this present time who has a warrant for their arrest or that has failed to comply with the terms for being on the jury. This individual goes into saying that they need money in the form of a bond. He gives out information, and a lot of these people are using Western Union to give them this money. That's never how the county judicial system would go about collecting money in the event that you had a warrant for your arrest with a bond to pay for that. They even go so far as to give a fake address that's right next door to the Twin Falls County Courthouse, 426 Shoshone Street instead of 425. And they even use the county phone number, 736-4040. It all sounds legitimate when this individual's calling, but there's nothing legitimate about it. We're doing everything we can to actively track down the callers. When we call the cell phone numbers on the caller ID, it goes back to a computer-generated get you nowhere, talk to anybody. So it definitely is a scam. This is nothing that Twin Falls County is doing at this point. Nor would we ever. That's just not the way we go about doing business. If somebody has a warrant or there's a bond associated with that warrant, you'll know that it's legitimate if there's something like that we're pursuing. But there's no legitimacy to this action that's going on right now.
It sounds like somebody's either just trying to make a little extra money on the side, or they perhaps like impersonating somebody who's a law enforcement officer, or both.
Right. Yeah. And I think the standard amount of money that they're asking for is like $500.
Oh.
And there's people who have sent that.
Well, hopefully, if you can track these people down, we can see some of that recovered.
Absolutely.
I would imagine. You have another event coming up this weekend. It's a bit more of a somber tone when it comes to remembering those people who've fallen in law enforcement.
Yes, this weekend is Law Enforcement Memorial Week. Saturday, the 16th of May at 11 a.m. at the City Park, there will be a big event where law enforcement from around the Magic Valley will show up with numerous people from throughout the community to pay tribute to and honor those who have been killed in the line of duty here in the state of Idaho, so with specific mention to those in our own area. It's an event that many people throughout the community have come together to support us on and donate just to pay tribute to those deputies and officers who have been killed in the line of duty.
You just came back, in fact, from a funeral in Coeur d'Alene.
I did.
Got to be very gut-wrenching whenever you have to go to one of these.
Yeah, there were hundreds and hundreds, more around 1,000 people at the funeral there in Coeur d'Alene to pay tribute and honor Sergeant Moore from the Coeur d'Alene Police Department. Myself, along with Officer Lou Coronado and Justin Hendrickson, rode our police motors in the funeral procession and participated in that service. And your heart goes out to the family members and the victims that are left behind. A very tragic and senseless loss for Sergeant Moore.
I would say that description, senseless. The newscasters use it now and then, but in this case, it truly was. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any rationale behind why it happened, but it certainly underscores the dangers in the job.
Absolutely. And we see it nationwide, and it's unfortunate that we even see it hit close to home here in the state of Idaho with the most recent shooting up in Coeur d'Alene. But just only a few years ago, it seems like it's been more than just a few years ago. It's been 10 years ago with Deputy Molson and Anderson shot over in Jerome County. Again, senseless loss of life. Really, when you take a look at what we do for a living day in and day out, as we're seeking to keep our community safe, it's unfortunate that those few who would perpetuate to take away the freedoms of the majority of us by their senseless acts, that's the price that has to be paid. But we do it day in and day out, knowing the risks, and we still continue to do it. It's our honor and pleasure to serve the members of our community.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming by again. 11 o'clock Saturday, the memorial's taking place at the city park.
Yes.
All right. I want to thank you again, Ken, and we'll see you. We might see you in a couple of weeks again. I got to do my math here.
Right.
So it's May 14th. Yeah, May 28th probably.
There we go. Yep.
All right.
Thanks, Phil.
Ken Menzel joining us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. 52 at our studios, 840. Maxine Bell is scheduled up next right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our studio guest, they always say at these dinners, needs no introduction, but she does need an introduction. State Representative Maxine Bell joining us in studio on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And right now it's 51 at our studios, coming up on 844. First of all, thank you for coming by.
Oh, thank you so much. This is such a pleasure. It's a terrific responsibility, and none of us take it lightly. 44,000 people out there expect me to do the right thing and to take care of their business while they take care of so many other things in the community. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat a little bit about it.
I was going to say, no one, I guess, expected a few weeks ago that you were going to be going back for a day.
No.
And yet, I just read this morning on the Associated Press wire, there's actually going to be a public hearing component to all of this.
There is.
So it could be a very long day, maybe even days before it's all done.
I would hope not days. They've worked very hard over the time that this happened. I didn't see this coming. This is the system we have been using. Now, in a perfect world, daddy and mother would live with the children.
Sure.
It is not a perfect world. And this is the system that I have been putting money into since I became part of the budget session, part of the budget committee. And it has always been a cooperative across other states, and now it included countries. But if you think about it, there are children behind every one of those numbers. And chances are daddy is in another state. And it almost takes two parents working anymore to provide for a family. There's no way you can assume that a single parent can do that. There are 97 of those for these children that we know live out of country. Most of them are in Canada. I don't really have any fear about Canada. There's several in Mexico, several in England. Hadn't thought about that before. But it's the responsible thing to do, and all of a sudden it became enmeshed with other people's views of law. And The Hague and everything else got involved. And it spizzed, as we know, it went right through the Senate, and then one of those senators who voted yes on it had a epiphany, I guess, and all of a sudden they get this uncomfort, almost a paranoia about things, and I respect that. But there comes a time when you have to set aside those things that you really feel deeply about and concerned about to do what's good for the children and for the state. And if you don't have a better plan, and nobody did, then this is the one.
I know a lot of concern I've heard from people on this, and it's called, SB 1067, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
And for the people just tuning in, that's the child support legislation that would help collect from parents deadbeats who may have gone into other countries. But a lot of people's concerns, I think, happen to be every time you have a program like this with the federal government, it's carrot and stick. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. And that's a big shortfall. And there's a feeling the federal government's a little heavy-handed in all of this.
Oh, we watch that. We watch it constantly. And when it comes to my budget, it looks great. It looks good. They've got something wonderful to help with law enforcement. And 3 years, 5 years down the road, I call it a fund shift. And then it shifts on general funds. And so you watch those things, and every department in our government has to watch and say, should the federal government suddenly choose to start balancing their budget, what would you do without this? What would you do with 10% less? What would it cost us on the general fund? And so that's the best we can do on that. This situation has been with us for many, many years, that $30 million. And we have some acronyms that get a little tiresome, TANF and TAFI. And if I don't tell you anything but the T, it's temporary. And it was the federal government's view that this was the way to help keep families together under the poverty level, 200% under poverty level. Keep dad and mother and the children in the families. It's very costly to have a foster child program, and it's not the best thing on the child. So this is a temporary help. That was the other $30 million. It's a block grant. It's been coming in pretty regularly, and it depends on how affluent Idaho is, quite how much they help us with. That's part of this. And you know, when you hear people worry about welfare, since welfare reform, 48 months in your lifetime, $309 a month, no alcohol, no drugs, you're looking for work or you're training for work. You have a plan. There are a lot of things that go along with the use of the rest of this money. There's food stamps in there, homeless, there's money for different places. And I guess if Big Brother wants to help us out on that part of our lives, we can keep a look on it and take that help. I agree with you. Our sovereignty is important. Our control is important. But you know that tax you paid in April, I think it's kind of nice if we get some of it back. I think we do a better job with it.
State Representative Maxine Bell is in the studio with us. It's about 10 minutes right now from 9 o'clock. 51 at our studios, in fact. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you, and of course, on Top Story. If you'd like to have a moment to speak to the representative, you can give us a call at 736-0300, 736-0300. One thing I noticed, and I get some emails from some people who are doing a lot of research on this. There was a concern that from a constitutional standpoint, it puts the state into the treaty situation. And I guess I have a pocket, they've even cited it, but I have a pocket constitution over here, and they say that the state shouldn't be entering into any treaties. Does the state actually enter into the treaty, or is it the federal government and we just become a party to what they're doing? How does that work?
You are so correct on that, and I get those same emails, and they're sincere. These people make points. They make good points. There's something to do with the Hague, but it's more or less a compact with other states. And they are correct on that, and we've had that looked at by our Attorney General. In fact, the changes that were made as we go back to work on Monday made sure that there was privacy on records, and it made sure that there was due process. Should another country's laws appear to be in conflict with ours, they do not supersede our laws. So I believe that there's nothing ever, Bill, in government that's black and white. I'm hesitant to say shades of gray anymore after that awful movie came out of whatever that was about, but which, by the way, I did not see.
Two of us. Yes.
Okay, we're good. But you just simply, I guess it comes right down to this is the system we have been using. It has worked, and the children are still without one of the parents in the home.
You gave a number. It was less than 100, right?
It was about 97.
Okay, you're not getting any favors done by people at newspapers who are throwing out figures into the tens of thousands. And I think that part of it, too. They may be referring to all of the children who are, receiving child support instead of just this group where a parent has left the country. Yes. But I think that has only inflamed the situation, and maybe someone needs to set those people straight.
I do, too. The number I keep getting is 155,000 children. And so apparently most of their dads are in Colorado or Nevada. And if you look, there's a reciprocal agreement there too. If that Nevada dad moves to Idaho, that Nevada child needs to have that same help from Idaho. So we go back to that. So that's the situation that that we're in. It's mainly those states around us, and it's interesting that most of those parents, when they split up, do not stay in the same community.
When the governor had this thing, apparently not fully rewritten, but there's been some changes made in the language. Is that done to try and ensure that the concerns of the opposition would be met?
It was done. It was to protect the database and the due process, and then there was an opt-out if needed, that exit. And I think that will, and I think that covers those concerns. Obviously, Rich, the committee chairman, has all but 2 of his committee now saying, I'm comfortable. The 2 are not comfortable, obviously are sticking tight to what they believe and what they feel, and I understand that, but the others have chosen to look at the bigger picture.
When you say opt out, that would mean then if their concerns were ever realized and somebody did try to impose foreign law and regulations upon us, that we could just say, no, we're done with this?
That's right.
And then the $43 million, though, goes away, too, doesn't it?
It says that to monitor international child support cases handled under the 2007 Hague Convention on the International Recovery of Child Support and Other Forms of Family Maintenance. And we can opt out of that treaty on Idaho's behalf. Ask the federal government, there's your key, to opt out of that treaty on Idaho's behalf if it's happening, affecting us in an unjust manner.
Well, here's a question. You can go ahead, if you approve it on Monday, so down the road, if somebody decided 3 or 4 years from now we didn't want to be a party to it, could we then rescind that and back out? Or once we're in, does the federal government just keep its tentacles in us and we can't get out?
I don't think so. I think this language now would get us out. And this, let's see, it's every about 5 years that we've been redoing this. So it appears that this language is good. One of the gentlemen on that committee that was so adamant on this part of it is a very well-known lawyer in Idaho. And we only allow about 3 lawyers at a time in our body, and that's adequate. But I do respect. I listen to them, and then I hope they'll sit down. But I do respect the fact that he was one of the beginning that was trying to work on this, and he's comfortable. And by the way, just on Tuesday, Washington State passed this same treaty agreement, very same one, and in another section of their code, they put a little bit of the comforting language like we have done.
We have a telephone caller with us. We've only got about 90 seconds, so caller, you'll have to make it quick. You're on the air with State Representative Maxine Bell. Do we have our caller with us? No, apparently not. You must have chased them away.
I hope not.
I was going to say, one of the things when I heard you speaking a couple of weeks ago, I thought, I wouldn't want to be debating her.
Well, it's been it's a great thing to be able to represent these people. Idaho is looking so much better now. We've been through a tremendous downturn, and I just got the figures for April. That's our biggest month. We're coming in at 7.8% over what we had assumed we would get, which appears to me that we may be ripe for a tax adjustment. And there was a little activity on maybe doing something with the sales tax on food or cutting that top rate this year, and it didn't gel. It wasn't ripe enough to do something with. Well, we're on this road now to a better way to treat our teachers, to keep them, to treat them the way they should be treated, and put the technology and put everything in the schools our children need. And that's going to take additional money, $102 million this year and ongoing. So if we can balance, if the economy continues, that's the other part of taking care of children. We can do a better job retaining good teachers, having our kids come out of there ready for the real world. And then, of course, maybe take a look at those taxes, that tax base that everybody pays, and they pay it willingly in this state. And then, of course, there's the infrastructure, and that's that other piece that just barely has a little work on it yet. More work to do, but a beginning. You have to remember, we can't eat all of the yogurt that Chobani makes, it has to have a good highway out.
That's true. That's true. And by the way, it's my favorite yogurt.
Well, you think about that when your gas tax goes up on July 1, if
Yeah,
you
waiting
would,
for
please.
that.
Yes.
I live close enough, though, I might be able to walk to work and save a
There
few dollars.
you go.
Representative Maxine Bell joining us in studio this morning. And of course, she's got a delayed vacation for summer because of the special session on Monday. And we hope to see you again sometime soon.
I would love to visit with you again, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure. And thank you. Coming up on 9 o'clock news from Fox. And we have one more hour of the program still ahead. In fact, I want to mention a couple of things we have coming up. Survey today says Hillary Clinton is trailing any Republican in all of the major battleground states for next year. Gosh, that makes some of us feel really good. 53 at our studios. And I wanted to mention just a quick thank you to State Representative Maxine Bell for coming in this morning. I have not had a lot of people from government on the program, aside from, I think, the city of Twin Falls. And U.S. Senator Mike Crapo was in about a month ago. So my first visit was someone from the state legislature. We hope to make that a more frequent aspect of the program. And I also wanted to mention, if I could very quickly off the top of this hour, that we have some very fine sponsors that make this program possible for you. And these are people who get behind this show. And to me, it's a wonderful thing because that revenue coming in means the lights stay on, and that means I get to keep working. And I have been telling you from really almost the point I started on this show. My first day on the air solo was January 2nd. So it's been a 2015 thing. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. That would mean that if there was a snow day, you would not be working. And they pay you during the course of the training. I should point that out as well. Pay $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I've also been sharing with everybody details on a business called Tint Lady. And I'll tell you what, this time of year, it's probably the best time of year to really think about all of this. What they do is they do window tints. They can do those for houses. They can do them for your whole house. They can do them for a business, especially a lot of these businesses. When you drive down Blue Lakes Boulevard, for instance, you see a lot of these brand new businesses. There's a lot of plate glass. And that is when you realize the sun hits that, that's a great conductor for heating up a room, which means your air conditioning is often working overtime. But if you have tint on the windows, you can cut that down. 72% heat reduction. So imagine that. 3/4 reduction. So your whole system works within a matter of months to probably, depending on the size of your building, a couple of years. You could have the entire project paid off through the savings in your electric. So they will do free estimates. You can call to schedule an appointment today, 736-8469. You can go online at tintladyidaho.com. They're locally owned and operated, over 20 years of experience. Located at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Hours Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and also by appointment on Saturdays. So there's a story today. In fact, I was just looking at my TV monitor a moment ago that says that a piece of equipment that should have been on this Amtrak train that crashed in Philadelphia was not there. Well, the engineer was also driving at 106 miles per hour. He's not talking to investigators at last word. Why is that? Well, he's probably lawyering up. Did he fall asleep? One theory I heard yesterday was if he had sleep apnea, he could have dozed off while he was in the cabin, or perhaps there could be some other issue he has going on. And in this day and age, they're not supposed to get aboard a train if they have a problem with substance abuse. Doesn't appear that. We're not saying that. And then there was another story that briefly got a little traction yesterday, and then it absolutely went away. Because this country has been getting all sorts of threats from the folks at ISIS halfway around the world for the last several weeks, especially about domestic attacks in this country. And these would take place on our infrastructure. That could mean railroads, that could mean airlines, that could mean roads, bridges, you name it. Aqueducts, dams, all of those things could be a potential target for terrorists. And we know they're bragging that they have a number of agents in this country. A short while before the Amtrak train derailed, 3.5 miles away, a SEPTA train. Now, SEPTA is a smaller service that is run, that's called Southeast Pennsylvania Transit Authority. although it works in conjunction. SEPTA, when you go to Washington, for instance, the metro system there works in conjunction with Amtrak. If you go over to the old Union Station, you can take the metro all over town, come back to Union Station and get aboard an Amtrak train and head off to all parts around the country. SEPTA is very similar. It's a smaller regional carrier, but it works in conjunction with Amtrak. A SEPTA train came to a stop after the engineer says it was hit by a projectile which shattered the windshield, so he brought it to a stop. 20 minutes later, 3.5 miles away, the Amtrak train derails. Now, this story got a lot of traction for a couple of hours yesterday. You heard it on Drudge, you saw it on Drudge, and then it went away. Now, maybe there's no relation. Maybe somebody was firing a shot in anger somewhere in the neighborhood, and the first train just got in the way, and the second train really was going 106 miles per hour and didn't have the proper equipment and derailed, killing many, many people. However, if ISIS has the capability to derail trains in this country and is now attacking trains, and you have a service called Amtrak, which has been, well, the government's been feeding it like a dead horse for nearly 50 years because it doesn't make any money. It's highly inefficient. I've been on Amtrak before, and let me tell you, it is a miserable experience. You ride for 20 minutes, then you stop for 40 minutes while somebody does track maintenance. Then you ride for 20 minutes, then you stop for 40 minutes while someone does more track maintenance. And this goes on during your entire trip. At least that was my experience. And after a while, you get hungry because you're so far behind schedule. Lunch is already passed a couple of hours beforehand. So you walk down into what's called a dining car, and you order a slice of pizza. A guy pulls out a frozen slab with a little sauce on it that they used a paintbrush to dab on there and some cheese, and he throws it in a plastic container into a microwave oven, and then he gives you this heated shoe leather back, and he charges you $5. Now, that was nearly 15 years ago. It's probably much, much higher now. Amtrak loses money. It doesn't just lose money, it hemorrhages money. And if suddenly the public realized that it was dangerous to be on Amtrak, that Amtrak was perhaps being a target of terrorists, then the public would altogether stop riding Amtrak. A couple of things would happen here. Amtrak, already nothing but a black hole, would become much, much worse. Much, much worse. It would become like a cave-in. 2, all of the people who actually travel Amtrak between New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, they would have to find other means of getting around, and much of the business in this country takes place in just that narrow corridor of the Northeast and the Middle Atlantic states. Here's my question. Would the government suppress the news of a potential attack on that train if it thought that it would keep people riding and keep Amtrak, if not necessarily profitable, which it never has been, but at least reasonably busy? I think that that's a legitimate question to ask in all of this. It's 53 at our studios, 9:14. Bill Colley with you this Thursday morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Immediately following the accident, Democrats in Congress were calling for more funding for Amtrak, saying, oh, we need more money. This is obviously why. Well, what they didn't know was the full story of why it crashed, and we still don't know that. They were acting as if somehow the tracks were so old and decrepit because they were not getting federal money, that the tracks apparently just split, the train went off the rails, and all of a sudden all 7 cars tipped over, and many, many people were killed, and isn't this a terrible tragedy? But now that we have other things that are being mentioned about it, 106 miles per hour on the turn when it wasn't supposed to be going more than 50 miles an hour around that turn, that could have well done it. The potentially suppressed story about a projectile being fired at the train, that could potentially be covered up. And now we're hearing, well, wait a minute, maybe there was a part that we could have had on all of this, and that part would have saved us from the accident. What's that going to cost? Oh, as much as the Democrats would like to spend on propping up Amtrak, that's what that will cost. Here's the thing. Washington Examiner today has this piece. Democrats responded immediately with a hand darting out to grab more taxpayer dollars. The writer says, without knowing the cause of the accident, they demanded a doubling of Amtrak's budget. A doubling. Imagine, you've got a dead horse in the barn, and it's been dead. It's all just skeletal remains. It's been dead since 1977. And you're going out there, and you've been feeding it every day. over the last 38 years. And so suddenly somebody says, you know what? Maybe you should double the feed. And it'll bring it back to life. Well, it's not going to happen. The news media, the writer says, were a little better until the cause of the crash was revealed. Confirmation bias and puntertry by the seat of one's pants produced its own sort of train wreck on the morning after the real crash. And again, news media, working in concert with big government, said spend, 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 spend. Lying amid its own ruin, Amtrak 188 may be regarded, the writer says, as a tragedy, a symbol of a cautionary tale, but it cannot legitimately be another excuse for throwing more good money after one of America's worst companies. Amtrak is a government-run, money-losing machine with appalling management practices that would never fly in the private sector. Amen. Glad someone is saying this. This whole notion that you have to continue to bleed the country dry for a service that no one wants to ride, and most Americans never will, is just unfathomable to me. Let the private sector come up with a better solution and see what happens. Turn the tracks over. And you know what? Probably the private sector doesn't want anything to do with it because it knows it's a dead horse. 917, Bill Colley with you. You can reach our program, News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com online at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. Also, you can send me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And, of course, you can comment about any topic we've had on the show so far this morning if you are so inclined. Email, I do tend to check it periodically during the course of the show, but obviously this is talk radio. It's more of an audio sort of format. I don't necessarily get to the email as quickly or as often probably as I do the telephones. You're up next, and you're on Top Story.
But I think you really hit the nail on the head, though. You know why it's losing a lot of money? It's because the government's involved. If they get involved, I guarantee you'll lose money because they'll do everything the wrong way.
I worked for the Postal Service for a year in a postal sorting plant. Let me tell you, I have seen the worst excesses, even though it's only considered quasi-government any longer. I have seen the worst excesses. People sleeping on the job, literally finding places where they could go take a chair and hide without being spotted, and just terrible, terrible management decisions. And I'm assuming that at Amtrak it's probably just as bad.
Well, you know, I know we could get ourselves out of debt. We could take care of the needy. We could do a lot of things if we would just get an independent auditor and get rid of all this waste.
Amen to that. And you know what? The waste may not be all that much of that huge budget deficit every year, but it's still there. Coming up on 919, we've got about 45 seconds before the break. You're up next on Top Story.
No wonder all your ex-co-hosts over there in Delaware said you're a complete delusional fool. Hey.
Now, who's that? Which ex-co-host? I didn't have a co-host. So what would your point be? What's that got to do with Amtrak? Hello? You know, that guy is a coward. Can we just get to that point? What are these drive-by cowards? I had no co-host. Delusional fool about what? That Amtrak is broke? I'll tell you what. That guy's a piece of work. Just typical of any liberal in this country. Yellow down the center of his back. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, 53 on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We've got plenty more to talk about. I mentioned it earlier. There is a survey out that says Hillary Clinton would lose to any Republican in 6 battleground states next year. Who'd have thunk it? 23 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, plus newsradio1310.com. You can listen to us online anywhere around the world. 54 degrees, warming up slowly this morning. I wanted to thank Dr. Jonathan Tripp for coming in yesterday morning. We had a change in plans at the last minute for the program. We were going to be talking diabetes. We ended up talking about skincare, but next Wednesday between the hours of 8:30 and 9 o'clock, the doctor will be back, or will he have one of the other members of his wonderful staff at Tripp Family Medicine joining us. Subject next week, diabetes. We'll actually talk about some of the modern innovations that could, in fact, help you if you're a diabetic. modern innovations that could help improve your living. And with diabetes, for a lot of people, that is a huge concern. Tune in each Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock for better health with Strip Family Medicine right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today. You can call 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Bill, you know, when people accuse you of being delusional, they need to probably think about the realities of what are happening in our country and not what is best beneficial for them, I guess. And it's a dirty damn shame because this is just a little bit of government for you. Apparently, you remember the VA hospital and how the veterans were dying, the veterans that fight and die for our country and come back maimed.
In fact, it was Don Imus who brought that to the public's attention before he got, how shall we put it, railroaded.
Well, they were supposed to be 900 of these government employees who were supposed to have been fired. And they found out, and this is a story you probably know about, but maybe the public doesn't. 900 of these employees that worked for the government, for the VA hospitals, were supposed to have been fired because they were negligent, to say the least. Well, in the end, after all of the BS that was told to us by these officials that are appointed, VA officials, 3 of them actually got fired. 3
out of hundreds.
Out of 900, they told us that we were fired. And then there's an article in the paper about how over 1,200 IRS agents, 1,200 right in there, who had been not filing their own taxes, had been lying about their incomes and all this. And after all this, after they got caught, these people got promotions and bonuses. And so, okay, is the reality that you are delusional, or is the reality that if you ride your horse till it dies, and there's only one left, and you killed the sucker, then you're a foot, and you're a foot for life. If you kill this thing that feeds us all, then we're all done.
Yeah.
So we can call each other names all day long, but the truth of the matter is it's so inefficient that it's going to take us all down if we don't wise up.
I thank you for the telephone call. Well, you know, you have some callers here that aren't interested in making any arguments because they simply don't have any. You know, they just want to call up and shout. And the folks out there, as he just pointed out, who do all the shouting, they don't know any solutions. Well, we paid their way through college. We pay their way now. We subsidize them throughout their lives, and they just think that's the way it is. They have no understanding that there's actually a cost to all of that. Coming up on 928-53 at News Radio 1310 KLIX, you're on the air next.
Yes, Bill. It's not only the government, it's right here in our own town. You had Travis on there yesterday talking about the budget plans and stuff. Well, it's even on the city and the county employees also around here that would get taxed for having them pay for, like, a while back I watched 4 people. One person was changing the signs around there, 3 watching. Then about an hour later, I seen them down by the animal shelter here where they got a little yard, sitting there sleeping for about an hour or so. Every time we go past, they were sitting there still sleeping. And that there, then you go on and add the county commissioner's wages on there. Those county commissioners are getting paid over $60,000 a year, and some of them about doing nothing because they don't want to make any waves because they want to get voted back in the next time.
I will only say this, and we've all witnessed moments where we see people gold bricking on the job. Funny thing, it happens in every office I've ever worked in and in every business I've ever been employed in. And on the other hand, it's obvious when we see it happening with government because we're taxpayers. But here's the flip side of that. Do the 4 guys you see just standing around, do they represent perhaps the tens of thousands of people working in government? I think that's an interesting question. Or are they just a small percentage? Do we just see the same guys over and over again?
Yeah. And that their system to do with the taxpayers' money is the biggest waste. If there was a private company, they would Orange have what they need and get it done and get it out of there because they have to take their budget, and if they don't make money, they're not in business.
I thank you for the call. And yes, I have seen people gold bricking on the job in regular businesses and in government. And I'm not exonerating anybody in government because government generally is a terrible, wasteful entity. But on the other hand, anecdotal evidence is one thing. We don't necessarily have any great studies on how frequent all of this is in front of us. Of course, we don't because nobody's doing them or nobody's allowed to do them. Hillary Clinton on the ropes. More details coming up. I had a chuckle this morning. I was reading the Drudge Report, and there was an Idaho mention. It has to do with Russia. Apparently, John Kerry was vacationing in Idaho about a year ago. Did anyone see him on the street? Yeah, walking around with his wife Lily and Marilyn and Eddie, and Grandpa was probably there too. Although sometimes Grandpa's a bat. But yeah, you could have seen him walking around the streets. That sort of long-faced Fred Gwynn look to him. So he was likely in Sun Valley. I don't think that John Kerry vacations in, I don't know, Burley. I don't know. They locked the doors if they saw him coming at all the shops in town. Look, there's a Frankenstein monster on the street. But he was vacationing in Idaho. And Kerry got on the telephone while he was on vacation with his counterpart, the foreign secretary in Russia. And he said, well, I'm in Idaho right now. And the foreign secretary said, I've heard they have great potatoes. Now, what is the Russian interest in great potatoes? Vodka. So Kerry sent him, as a gift, some potatoes. So Kerry was in Russia this week. And to reciprocate, what happened was his counterpart in Russia gave him not only a bushel of potatoes, but a bushel of tomatoes. And I'm told this also came with a vodka recipe. Although Kerry would seem more of a Cabernet type of guy, wouldn't he? Or some very, very expensive sparkling wine. 9:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 54 at our studios. So the Russians at least are appreciative of Idaho potatoes, and they understand that a good potato is what you need for a little skull-popping vodka. Kerry's predecessor in the office, State Department. I've been by the State Department, never been inside. I walked by it one day. I was on my way to a train terminal for the Metro in Washington, and I had been at the Lincoln Memorial, and I walked all the way down to Foggy Bottom and then on to George Washington University to catch a train. It's quite a hike, but I walked by the State Department. For all the money that has been spent in Washington on all of the grandeur, they didn't spend that at the State Department. It is a dump. It looks like a suburban office park or an elementary school built in 1954. And that's the best you can say about it. Hillary Clinton served in that office before John Kerry. There is a story at The Hill. Now, The Hill is not a conservative newspaper. The Hill is one of your left-leaning Washington publications. Clinton losing in battlegrounds. The writer says Hillary Clinton trails a generic Republican presidential candidate by double digits among voters in 6 key battleground states, according to a new poll from the GOP firm Vox Populi. The survey, conducted on behalf of the conservative super PAC American Crossroads, found an unnamed GOP candidate taking 51% support among voters in Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Nevada, Ohio, and Virginia. Clinton takes only 41% among voters in those states, according to the poll. Meanwhile, over at the Weekly Standard, there's a piece today. Jonathan V. Last in his newsletter. I get this in my email. And he says it's amazing that, considering the run of bad luck Hillary Clinton has had, that her poll numbers are still so incredibly high. Why is that? Well, look at who her competition is in her own party. You got Bernie Sanders. You take one look at the guy. There's the absent-minded professor just shuffling along, rambling on about his hero Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, his other hero. And this is the best they can do. And yet all of the pundits, especially the left-leaning ones, are saying, he'll give Hillary a run for her money. No, he won't. He can barely get through a sentence. He stumbles and shambles, and people aren't going to vote for this guy. And as soon as you hear he's a granola chomper from Vermont, that's going to be a turnoff even for a lot of people in his own party, and especially for independents. And then you've got Elizabeth Warren, who says she's not a candidate, even though she's been begged to run by the far left in her party. And yet she's the same woman who claimed that she was a Cherokee Indian so she could get a job at Harvard. Is it Harvard where she teaches? I believe it is. And then got elected on that spurious claim to the U.S. Senate, defeating Scott Brown. Well, Massachusetts is a sick, twisted place. But anyway, and Brown was no conservative. Let's be honest about that. And then you've got Martin O'Malley, who's still not sure, who created the policing system in Baltimore that led to the problems they had there a few weeks ago. So Hillary Clinton is in a race with these people, none of whom are what you'd call stable, whereas the Republicans will have about 15 people, maybe 20, before it's all over with. And the Republican field, I know the left doesn't like a lot of them because, well, they simply won't go in for a lot of leftist views on bankrupting the country and triple marriages and sex with horses, cows, and pigs. But they're fairly stable people otherwise. Yesterday, I heard Bobby Jindal. I was driving home from my afternoon walk, and I happened to hear Bobby Jindal on Sean Hannity's program. There you go. There's a guy, smartest kid in class, brilliant guy, and he isn't even sure he's going to be running. But you've got a lot of this potential that you simply don't have over on the Democrat side. So right now, the Democrats simply don't have anyone else they can look at and say, aha, we'll go with that. There's no substitute. They destroyed their bench. For all of the talk about the Republican Party being dried up a few years ago and blowing away, it controls most state legislatures now in the country. It controls most governors' mansions now in the country. It controls the House and the Senate. Democrats don't have a whole heck of a lot more to work with now, do they? 54 at our studios, 940. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310. Oh, and in the Washington Post today, Clinton is being called a coward because she will not give her position on the Pacific Free Trade Agreement. Just a quick personal note. We all have people in our careers who work as mentors for us. And those people, we lose track of them. They move on or we move on and we don't hear from them. When I was a college student, there was a fellow who was working on the most popular radio station in Buffalo, New York, and his name was Joe Galuski. And I would listen to Joe sometimes driving to class, and didn't know him at the time. Friends of mine had met him at the one of the local fairs when he was broadcasting from the fair, and they said nice things about the guy. And a few years later, I was working at a radio station in the Syracuse, New York area, and one day I heard that he'd been hired there and got to hear him on the air. And a year after that, I ended up getting hired at the same station, and I ended up working with Joe. We had to go to a conference one time, and we went to this old monastery, which was on one of the Finger Lakes, and we shared a room together at this big old estate, and we were able to chat and drive down together. I didn't really know him well at the time, but we drove together about an hour on the way down and then an hour on the way back after the conference wrapped up at the end of the weekend. And I found him to be unusual for a broadcaster in the sense that if he had any politics, he didn't much talk about them, and yet he was in talk radio. And he had a love of sports. He'd been a college basketball player, I believe at Marquette. He was an avid golfer, and he was good enough that if he had been maybe given a little bit more time to it when he was young, he might have actually been a professional golfer. But here's the thing. Joe would like to joke around. We would talk about women at work all the time. All the guys would, and Joe would, oh, yeah, she's nice looking. But at the end of the day, at the end of every day, Joe would go home from work to his wife. He didn't go out and carouse. He went to church on Sundays. Very rare at the time in the broadcasting business. And he was married to the same woman. He'd met her in the 1970s when he was a young man, and they were married for more than 40 years. And then a few years ago, she retired from a teaching job she had, and I was working at the Delaware beaches, and the Maryland beach was just a few miles across the state line too as well. And one day we were talking on the telephone, and I had not seen him in a number of years, but we were talking on the telephone, and he was telling me that he was planning on retirement soon. And I got an opportunity to tell him, I said, well, look, you've been planning on Florida, right? And he said, yes. I said, tell you what, you come here, you can live in the Ocean City, Maryland area. You'll be able to golf, well, if not every day like Florida, maybe 360 days. So it'll be almost like having the opportunity to golf every day. And I know with your experience and your background that you'll be able to get a job here on a part-time basis if you just want to do some fill-in work. In fact, I said, the people I work for, I've told them about you. They'd love to have you. So he said, I'll consider that. And he was approaching retirement. He was 62, I believe. And this past fall, in September, I got a telephone call from one of my old bosses who I'd worked with, who had been our program director at the radio station back in the 90s for a time. And he had just been appointed as the national representative for all of Clear Channel. Well, they call it iHeartRadio now. It used to be called Clear Channel. He is now the fellow, and he oversees all of their talk radio stations all over the country. And it was the day after the primary. One of my candidates had just lost last September. And I got a call from this fellow, and he said, hey, I'm in a new job. I said, yes, I read about it online the other day. He said, well, would you like to go back to Syracuse, work as the program director? You'll be working with Joe. He's doing the morning show. This was a Wednesday, I believe. And he said to me, I think you'll enjoy it. I think it'll be great. You know the history of the place. You know everybody there who's still on staff. Some of these people I've known, since the late 1980s. And I said, well, I'll talk to them. And the following day, I talked to the operations manager, who was another old coworker and friend. And he said, listen to our show on Friday morning. And I tuned in and I listened to the show on Friday morning. And they wanted me to write a critique of what I heard. And I was shocked. I mean, Joe just didn't seem to be himself. He seemed to be all over the place. And it didn't seem to be the same person that I had known. He seemed to be slurring words and the like. And I did not mention that part of it, but I wrote a critique and I said, I think you can do much better than all of this. That was a Friday. The following Monday, Joe was diagnosed with lymphoma. And he had survived a similar scare with it in 1993, I believe it was. And he was on a rapid, and this was a guy who was always active, and he looked far younger than his actual age. So he left work, he departed, and at that point they made no decisions on hiring anybody to run the radio station. This job came along. This is a beautiful town. It doesn't snow as much here as it does there. It doesn't even get as cold as much here as it does there. And by October, it looked like Joe was on the mend. And then nothing, silence for months and months and months. Until the beginning of last week when I got a message from a friend that Joe was in hospice and friends were dropping by to visit him. And some friends actually went to see him this past weekend and they said he could no longer speak. And he passed away early this morning. And it's just an opportunity for me. I know none of you knew who this man was, but he was very, very important to me in my early days in radio, my formative years. And I just had tremendous respect for the fact that he was such a decent and devoted family man. That takes work, but he made it seem like it was effortless. Coming up on 9:50, Mike Gallagher is on the way in just a few minutes. Replacing Mike Huckabee, that's brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You can reach them at 736-6563. And I want to thank Mike Gallagher. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, he is, if you maybe missed the last couple of weeks, you've been away, Mike Huckabee announced he's running for president. Some of you probably know that, and because of that, he's pulled himself off the air. So Mike Gallagher will be filling in until Mike Huckabee feels he's ready to come back to radio, and that will be when Mike Huckabee is done politicking. And if he gets lucky and he ends up, well, it might not be luck, but if he ends up getting himself elected a couple of times, we won't see him back on the Huckabee Report for a decade. Although, if he's president for 8 years and then comes back and does it, he probably is going to have a even much bigger following. Very quickly, before I wrap up today, Rush Limbaugh will be coming along in, 12 minutes. He'll be along just after news from Fox in the next hour. And then following news at 1 o'clock from Fox, Sean Hannity, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Glenn Beck following 4 o'clock news, Dave Ramsey tonight. All of that ahead during the course of the day. On Top Story as well, we've got a lot to talk about tomorrow, and so God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'm back in this chair between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Before I wrap up today, does anyone know the name John Stossel? He worked at ABC News for years. Now he's at Fox News. John Stossel is perhaps one of the few true libertarians working in the television news business, not a conservative. He's a constitutionalist libertarian. He's also a columnist. He's writing at townhall.com today a book review. Now, Charles Murray, who wrote a couple of great books, one about the bell curve a few years ago, and then the other one was called Growing Apart. I read his books in the past. I think the guy has done some marvelous research, and he really explains how this country has become sort of two different countries instead of the one it used to be, why we're so disunified any longer. And that is because you've got simply a whole class of people who don't care out there. As long as the government throws them the occasional, bag of Doritos and a six-pack, they just want to sit around and smoke hemp all day long, arguing that this is not going to save the country. Stossel is reviewing the latest book by Murray, and it says, By the People, Rebuilding Liberty Without Permission. He writes, America is no longer the land of the free. We are still free in the sense that Norwegians, Germans, and Italians are, but that's not what Americans used to mean by freedom. While we try to invent new things, Stossel says, government constantly seeks new ways to control us. The number of federal crimes on the books is now 50% larger than it was 30 years ago, a time when many people mistakenly thought the U.S. would cut the size of government. Murray says in his book correctly that no ordinary human being, not even a team of lawyers, can ever be sure how to obey the 810 pages of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2000. Well, that was about 10 years ago that passed, right? Somewhere in that neighborhood. Or the 1,024 pages of the Affordable Care Act, or the 2,300 pages of Dodd-Frank. What if we all stop trying, Stossel asks. The government can't put everyone in jail. That is the implication of Charles Murray's latest book. We've heard the word nullification bounced around on this program by some callers and myself in the past. And it's an old notion going all the way back to, what was it, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina in the 1800s during the formative years of this country. And he was talking about states nullifying federal laws that the states didn't agree with. According to Stossel, Murray recommends in his book that the public, that the average John, the average Joe, the average Jane and June, we can practice our own form of nullification when it comes to onerous regulations and laws. En masse, we just start refusing to obey. What are they going to do? There are only so many jail cells and FEMA camps available. Somebody has to still work and produce in order for all of this to, especially your public servants. So here's a concept that I think needs to be discussed more, perhaps beyond the last few minutes of this program today. But I think it's a wonderful idea to at least start considering it. There's an old line from Gandhi where they talk about a general strike, where one of Gandhi's friends says, "It would terrify them." Well, perhaps that's what we need to do. We need to terrify them. 56 at our studios. It's 9:59. News from Fox is next.